The late 2000s and early 2010s, a period etched in maritime history as the golden age of Somali piracy. From the impoverished shores of a failed state, a new breed of buccaneers emerged, wielding AK-47s and rocket-propelled grenades with unsettling efficiency. They weren't romantic swashbucklers seeking buried treasure. These were desperate men driven by poverty, opportunity, and a volatile mix of local grievances and international indifference. Their targets were the arteries of global commerce. The cargo ships, container vessels, and, most lucratively, the oil tankers that traversed the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean, vital waterways connecting east and west. For years, the world had watched with growing alarm as pirate attacks escalated in frequency and audacity. What began as opportunistic raids on smaller vessels soon morphed into meticulously planned operations targeting increasingly larger and more valuable prizes. International naval patrols, while present, struggled to effectively patrol the vast expanse of ocean, leaving many ships vulnerable to attack. The pirates, emboldened by their successes, became increasingly sophisticated, employing speedboats, satellite phones, and even rudimentary intelligence gathering to identify and intercept their targets. They operated with a chilling calculation, exploiting loopholes in international law and the reluctance of ship owners to arm their crews, turning the high seas into their personal hunting ground. Against this backdrop of escalating maritime crime, one particular incident stands out, a brazen act that pushed the boundaries of piracy to unprecedented levels. It wasn't just another hijacking. It was a statement, a calculated gamble that would send shockwaves through the shipping industry and force the international community to confront the growing menace of Somali piracy head-on. The target, a supertanker, a behemoth of the seas, laden with millions of barrels of crude oil, a prize so valuable it represented a significant portion of a small nation's GDP. Imagine this vessel, a floating city, hundreds of meters long, its deck a maze of pipes and valves, its hull a steel fortress designed to withstand the immense pressures of the ocean. This wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of global trade, a vital link in the complex chain that delivers energy to homes and businesses around the world. Its very size spoke of its importance, a floating testament to the interconnectedness of the global economy. Such a vessel was an act of extraordinary daring, a feat that required not only skill and determination, but also a profound understanding of the risks involved. The pirates knew the stakes. They knew that hijacking a supertanker would attract international attention, potentially drawing the wrath of powerful navies and security forces. But they also knew that the potential reward was immense, far exceeding anything they had ever attempted before. They were betting that the value of the cargo, combined with the vulnerability of the crew, would give them leverage in negotiations, allowing them to extract a ransom that would transform their lives and elevate their status within the pirate community. And so, under the cover of darkness, they struck. Their speedboats, sleek and agile, sliced through the waves, converging on the unsuspecting tanker like wolves closing in on their prey. The attack was swift and brutal, a coordinated assault that overwhelmed the ship's security and left the crew with no choice but to surrender. Within hours, the pirates were in control, the tanker was under their command, and the stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would capture the world's attention. The demand that followed was as audacious as the hijacking itself. $50 million, an unprecedented sum, a figure that dwarfed previous ransom demands and sent a clear message that these pirates were playing a different game. This wasn't about petty theft or opportunistic extortion. This was about making a statement, about challenging the established order, and about demonstrating the power and reach of Somali piracy on the global stage. The world held its breath, waiting to see how this high-stakes drama would unfold, unaware of the complex web of negotiations, secret plans, and potential for violence that lay ahead. The hijacking of the supertanker and the demand for $50 million had not only raised the stakes, but had also ignited a fuse that threatened to explode into a full-blown international crisis. The vulnerability of even the largest vessels to a determined pirate attack might seem counterintuitive. These oil tankers, colossal structures of steel and engineering, appear impregnable, their sheer size a deterrent. Yet, beneath the imposing facade lies a complex reality. A relatively small crew, limited defensive capabilities, and predictable routes that make them vulnerable to a well-planned assault. The pirates understood this vulnerability intimately, exploiting the inherent weaknesses of these maritime giants with ruthless efficiency. The attack on the supertanker unfolded with a precision that belied the pirates' humble origins. It began, as most of these operations did, with the approach of seemingly innocuous fishing vessels. These weren't the trawlers of legitimate fishermen, but rather converted speedboats, stripped down and souped up with powerful engines capable of reaching speeds exceeding 30 knots. They were the wolves in sheep's clothing of the sea, their unassuming appearance masking a deadly intent. As darkness fell, the speedboats, typically numbering between 3 and 5, closed in on the tanker. Their low profile made them difficult to detect on radar, and the vastness of the ocean provided ample cover. The pirates, seasoned veterans of countless raids, navigated with skill and confidence, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of resistance. The weaponry they carried was simple but effective: AK-47 assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, and grappling hooks. The AK-47, a ubiquitous symbol of conflict, provided the firepower for close-quarters combat, while the RPGs were used to disable critical systems and intimidate the crew. The grappling hooks, thrown with practiced accuracy, allowed the pirates to scale the tanker's high freeboard, bypassing traditional security measures. The pirates' tactics were equally straightforward: overwhelm the crew with a sudden and coordinated assault, seize control of the bridge, and establish dominance over the vessel. They relied on speed, surprise, and a willingness to use violence to achieve their objectives. There was little room for negotiation in the initial stages of the attack. The pirates' primary goal was to secure the tanker as quickly as possible, minimizing the risk of interference from naval forces or armed security teams. In this particular case, the pirates timed their attack to coincide with a shift change. When the crew was at its most vulnerable, they approached from multiple directions simultaneously, firing their AK-47s into the air to create a sense of chaos and panic. The RPGs, though rarely used to directly strike the hull due to the risk of fire or explosion, were fired in close proximity to the bridge and engine room, sending a clear message of intent. The ship's security team, if one existed, was likely small and ill-equipped to repel such an attack. Most tankers relied on passive security measures, such as razor wire and high-pressure water hoses, which proved woefully inadequate against determined pirates armed with automatic weapons. The crew, primarily composed of civilian mariners, were trained in basic safety procedures but lacked the combat skills necessary to engage in a firefight. Within minutes, the pirates had breached the tanker's defenses and stormed the bridge. The captain and officers, faced with overwhelming force, had no choice but to surrender. The pirates quickly secured the communications equipment, preventing the crew from sending distress signals, and established control over the ship's navigation systems. With the bridge secured, the pirates fanned out across the tanker, rounding up the crew and confining them to a secure location, typically the mess hall or engine room. Any resistance was met with swift and brutal force. The pirates were not interested in killing the crew, as their lives were valuable as bargaining chips, but they were willing to use violence to maintain control and discourage any attempts at rebellion. The entire operation, from the initial approach to the securing of the tanker, took less than an hour. It was a testament to the pirates' skill, their ruthlessness, and the inherent vulnerability of even the largest ships to a well-executed attack. The supertanker, once a symbol of global trade and engineering prowess, was now a floating prison, its fate hanging in the balance, its crew held hostage by a band of Somali pirates. The stage was set for a tense and dangerous standoff, a test of wills between the pirates, the ship's owners, and the international community. The silence that followed the hijacking was deafening. The world waited, holding its breath, for the inevitable communication from the pirates. When it came, it was delivered not through official channels or diplomatic backlinks, but via a scratchy satellite phone call to a maritime news agency, a deliberate act designed to maximize publicity and amplify their message. The message itself was stark and unambiguous. $50 million. The figure hung in the air, a number so large it seemed almost unreal. It was more than double the highest ransom ever paid to Somali pirates, a quantum leap that shattered all previous expectations. The immediate reaction was disbelief. Had there been a misunderstanding? Was this a typo? But the pirates were adamant. $50 million in unmarked bills, delivered to a designated location at sea. Failure to comply, they warned, would have dire consequences for the crew and the vessel. The demand sent shockwaves through the shipping industry. Insurance underwriters scrambled to reassess their risk profiles, while ship owners convened emergency meetings to discuss their options. The immediate impact was a sharp increase in insurance premiums for vessels transiting the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. Many shipping companies rerouted their ships, adding thousands of miles to their journeys and significantly increasing their operating costs. The pirates had effectively imposed a tax on global trade, disrupting supply chains and driving up prices for consumers around the world. But why $50 million? What prompted the pirates to demand such an exorbitant sum? Several factors likely contributed to their audacious calculation. First, there was the sheer value of the cargo. The supertanker was carrying millions of barrels of crude oil, a commodity that commanded a high price on the global market. The pirates undoubtedly believed that the value of the cargo justified a higher ransom demand. They likely reasoned that the ship owners and their insurers would be willing to pay a substantial sum to avoid losing the oil, not to mention the ship itself. Second, there was an element of desperation. The pirates were operating in a volatile and unpredictable environment, facing increasing pressure from international naval forces and local authorities. They may have seen the hijacking of the supertanker as a one-shot opportunity to secure their financial future, a chance to escape the cycle of poverty and violence that had defined their lives. Third, there was undoubtedly a degree of calculated risk-taking. The pirates had witnessed the success of previous hijackings, where ransoms had been paid and vessels released. They may have believed that they could push the boundaries even further, testing the limits of the international community's tolerance. They may have reasoned that the higher the ransom demand, the more attention they would attract, and the greater their leverage in negotiations. The $50 million demand also had a significant impact on international negotiations. Governments and organizations that typically handled piracy negotiations were now faced with an unprecedented challenge. The sums involved were so large that they raised serious ethical and political questions. Should governments negotiate with pirates? Should ransoms be paid at all? Given the risk of encouraging further acts of piracy, these were difficult questions with no easy answers. The demand also complicated the involvement of international naval forces. While warships had been dispatched to the region to monitor the situation and deter further attacks, their options were limited. A direct military intervention to rescue the crew and retake the tanker carried enormous risks, including the potential for casualties among the hostages and the possibility of environmental damage from a ruptured oil tanker. The pirates' $50 million ransom demand was more than just a number. It was a game-changer. It raised the stakes in the fight against Somali piracy, forcing the international community to confront the complex challenges of maritime security and the ethical dilemmas of negotiating with criminals. It was a bold and audacious move that would ultimately determine the fate of the hijacked supertanker and its crew, and shape the future of anti-piracy efforts in the region. As the pirates consolidated their control over the supertanker, and the exorbitant ransom demand reverberated across the globe, a silent but powerful force began to stir on the horizon. The international community, jolted into action by the sheer audacity of the crime, mobilized its naval assets. Warships, the symbols of national power and maritime law enforcement, started converging on the area, transforming the once empty expanse of ocean into a strategic chessboard. The response was multinational, reflecting the shared concern over the growing threat of piracy and the need to protect vital shipping lanes. Nations with significant maritime interests, from Europe to Asia to North America, dispatched their vessels, each with a clearly defined set of objectives, but united in their determination to resolve the crisis. Leading the charge were the navies of the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, all of whom had a long history of maritime operations in the region. Their warships, equipped with advanced radar systems, sophisticated weaponry, and highly trained personnel, were capable of projecting force and maintaining a constant presence in the area. Other nations, including China, Russia, India, and various European countries, also contributed to the international naval effort, adding to the growing coalition of forces. The stated objectives of the naval deployment were multifaceted. First and foremost was the protection of shipping lanes. The presence of warships acted as a deterrent to other pirate groups, discouraging them from launching further attacks on commercial vessels. The warships patrolled key areas, provided escorts for vulnerable ships, and maintained a watchful eye on the hijacked supertanker. Second, the naval forces aimed to prevent escalation. The situation was volatile, with the potential for violence to erupt at any moment. The warships served as a buffer between the pirates and the outside world, preventing any unauthorized vessels from approaching the tanker and minimizing the risk of a confrontation. They also monitored the pirates' activities, gathering intelligence and preparing for any eventuality. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the warships stood ready to potentially rescue the crew of the supertanker. While a direct military intervention was considered a last resort, it remained a viable option if negotiations failed or if the pirates threatened the lives of the hostages. The warships carried specialized units trained in hostage rescue operations, who were prepared to storm the tanker and liberate the crew if necessary. As the warships converged on the tanker, a tense atmosphere descended upon the scene. The pirates, initially emboldened by their success, now found themselves surrounded by a formidable display of naval power. The constant presence of the warships, their radar systems sweeping the area, and the occasional overflight of maritime patrol aircraft served as a constant reminder of the risks they faced. The naval forces, for their part, maintained a careful balance between deterrence and de-escalation. They avoided any provocative actions that could trigger a violent response from the pirates, but they also made it clear that they were prepared to use force if necessary to protect the crew and the vessel. The atmosphere aboard the supertanker was undoubtedly fraught with anxiety. The crew, held hostage in cramped and uncomfortable conditions, could only imagine the drama unfolding around them. They were aware of the warships on the horizon, but they had no way of knowing whether a rescue attempt was imminent or whether they would be left to the mercy of the pirates. The converging warships represented a significant shift in the dynamics of the crisis. The pirates were no longer operating in a vacuum. They were now facing the collective might of the international community. The stage was set for a complex and dangerous game of cat and mouse, a test of wills between the pirates, the ship owners, and the naval forces. The world watched with bated breath, hoping for a peaceful resolution, but prepared for the possibility of a violent confrontation. Behind the imposing facade of warships and the bluster of international condemnation, a more delicate and clandestine operation was underway: the negotiation process. This was a shadowy world of backchannels, coded communications, and high-stakes bargaining, where the lives of the crew and the fate of the supertanker hung in the balance. The individuals involved in these negotiations were a diverse group, ranging from seasoned maritime security experts to discreet intermediaries with connections to the Somali pirate community. The primary responsibility for negotiating with the pirates typically fell to the ship owner's insurance company. These companies specialized in handling such crises, possessing the expertise and resources to manage the complex logistics of ransom negotiations. They often employed specialized crisis management teams, composed of negotiators, lawyers, and security consultants, who worked around the clock to secure the release of the vessel and its crew. However, direct communication with the pirates was rarely straightforward. The pirates operated in a decentralized and often fragmented manner, making it difficult to identify a single point of contact or establish a reliable line of communication. They often used disposable satellite phones and encrypted messaging apps to avoid detection, and their demands were often communicated through intermediaries, adding another layer of complexity to the negotiation process. These intermediaries played a crucial role in facilitating communication and building trust between the ship owners and the pirates. They were often local elders, tribal leaders, or former pirates who had established relationships with the pirate community. They acted as go-betweens, conveying messages, verifying identities, and mediating disputes. Their local knowledge and cultural understanding were invaluable in navigating the complex social dynamics of the Somali pirate world. Understanding the motivations of the pirates was a key challenge for the negotiators. Were they driven solely by financial gain, or were there other factors at play, such as political grievances, clan rivalries, or a desire for revenge. Understanding these motivations was essential for crafting a negotiation strategy that would appeal to the pirates' interests and secure the release of the vessel and its crew. The negotiators also had to contend with the ethical dilemmas of paying ransoms. Many governments and international organizations officially condemned the practice of paying ransoms to pirates, arguing that it only encourages further acts of piracy and fuels the cycle of violence. However, ship owners and insurance companies often faced a difficult choice: pay the ransom and secure the release of the crew, or risk their lives and potentially lose the vessel. The decision to pay a ransom was never taken lightly. It involved weighing the potential consequences of each course of action, considering the safety of the crew, the value of the cargo, and the long-term implications for the shipping industry. The negotiators had to navigate a complex web of legal, ethical, and financial considerations, all while under intense pressure to resolve the crisis as quickly as possible. In the case of the hijacked supertanker, the $50 million ransom demand presented an unprecedented challenge to the negotiators. The sheer size of the sum raised serious questions about whether it was even feasible to pay such a large amount. It also increased the risk that the pirates would renege on their agreement, demanding even more money or harming the crew. The negotiations were further complicated by the presence of international naval forces in the area. While the warships were there to deter further attacks and potentially rescue the crew, their presence also created a risk of escalation. The negotiators had to coordinate closely with the naval forces to ensure that their actions did not inadvertently jeopardize the negotiations or provoke a violent response from the pirates. The negotiation process was a delicate dance, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, where every word and every action had the potential to influence the outcome. The negotiators had to be patient, persistent, and resourceful, using all their skills and experience to navigate the treacherous waters of Somali piracy and secure the safe release of the supertanker and its crew. While the world's attention was focused on the geopolitical machinations and financial calculations surrounding the hijacking, it's crucial not to lose sight of the human element. The crew of the supertanker held hostage against their will. These were not soldiers or security personnel, but ordinary men and women from various corners of the globe, simply doing their jobs, caught in the crosshairs of a desperate and dangerous situation. Their ordeal, largely unseen and unheard, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of extreme adversity. Confined to the cramped and often unsanitary conditions of the ship's mess hall or engine room, their days blurred into a monotonous cycle of fear, uncertainty, and boredom. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by the sounds of the pirates patrolling the decks, their AK-47s a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Food and water were often scarce and of poor quality, further adding to their physical discomfort. The psychological impact of being held hostage was immense. The crew members were cut off from the outside world, deprived of contact with their families and loved ones. They had no way of knowing how long their ordeal would last or whether they would ever see their homes again. The uncertainty and lack of control eroded their sense of security and well-being, leading to anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of helplessness. The pirates, while primarily motivated by financial gain, often treated the crew with a mixture of indifference and casual cruelty. They were subjected to verbal abuse, intimidation, and occasional acts of violence. The pirates, often young and impressionable, were themselves products of a harsh and unforgiving environment, desensitized to the suffering of others. Communication between the crew members was often limited, as they were kept under constant surveillance by the pirates. However, they found ways to support each other, sharing stories, offering words of encouragement, and maintaining a sense of camaraderie. These small acts of solidarity helped them to cope with the stress and trauma of their captivity. Despite the overwhelming odds, there were instances of bravery and resistance. Some crew members quietly sabotaged equipment, hoping to slow down the tanker or disrupt the pirates' operations. Others used their technical skills to maintain essential systems, ensuring that the ship remained operational and preventing further hardship for their fellow hostages. One notable example involved the ship's engineer, who managed to secretly disable the tanker's main engine, Preventing the pirates from sailing it to a more secure location, he risked severe punishment if he was caught, but he believed that it was his duty to protect the ship and its cargo. Another crew member, a former radio operator, managed to establish a clandestine communication link with the outside world, using a hidden transmitter to send distress signals and provide updates on the situation to maritime authorities. His actions helped to keep the pressure on the pirates and facilitated the efforts of the negotiators. These acts of defiance, though small in scale, were significant in their impact. They demonstrated the crew's refusal to be completely broken by their captors and their determination to maintain their dignity and humanity in the face of extreme adversity. The story of the hijacked supertanker is not just a story of piracy and geopolitical intrigue. It is also a story of human resilience, courage, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The crew members, despite their ordeal, emerged from their captivity with their spirits unbroken, their bonds strengthened, and their appreciation for life renewed. Their experience serves as a reminder of the importance of empathy and compassion in a world often dominated by power and profit. They were the silent victims, yet their strength spoke volumes. While the negotiations continued, a parallel, even more secretive operation was taking shape behind the scenes. Recognizing the immense risks associated with paying the exorbitant ransom and the potential for a catastrophic outcome if negotiations failed, a covert plan was devised to outmaneuver the pirates. This plan, shrouded in secrecy and known only to a select few, represented a high-stakes gamble with the potential for both immense reward and devastating consequences. The details of the plan were fiercely guarded, but it's understood that it involved a combination of intelligence gathering, deception, and the potential for a carefully coordinated military intervention. The driving force behind the plan was a coalition of naval forces, security contractors hired by the ship owner, and intelligence agencies, all working together in a clandestine and highly sensitive operation. The first phase of the plan focused on gathering intelligence about the pirates' capabilities, their weaknesses, and their intentions. This involved deploying surveillance drones, intercepting communications, and using human intelligence sources to infiltrate the pirate network. The goal was to gain a comprehensive understanding of the pirates' operations, their command structure, and their likely response to various scenarios. Based on the intelligence gathered, a deception strategy was developed to sow discord among the pirates and weaken their resolve. This involved spreading false rumors, creating false trails, and using psychological warfare tactics to undermine their confidence and create internal divisions. The aim was to make the pirates believe that they were being betrayed or that a rescue attempt was imminent, thereby disrupting their plans and creating opportunities for intervention. The most risky element of the plan was the potential for a direct military intervention to retake the supertanker and rescue the crew. This option was considered a last resort, to be used only if negotiations failed or if the pirates threatened the lives of the hostages. The intervention would involve a highly specialized team of commandos, trained in maritime counterterrorism operations, who would be tasked with storming the tanker and neutralizing the pirates with minimal casualties. The risks associated with such an operation were immense. The pirates were heavily armed and prepared to fight to the death. The tanker was a confined and complex environment, making it difficult to maneuver and increasing the risk of collateral damage. Any mistake could result in the loss of innocent lives in a catastrophic environmental disaster. To mitigate these risks, the intervention plan was meticulously planned and rehearsed. The commandos trained on a full-scale replica of the supertanker, practicing various scenarios and developing contingency plans for every conceivable eventuality. They were equipped with state-of-the-art weaponry, night vision equipment, and communication devices, ensuring that they had the best possible chance of success. The decision to launch the intervention would be made at the highest levels of government, based on a careful assessment of the risks and potential rewards. The naval forces would be on standby, ready to execute the plan at a moment's notice. The success of the operation would depend on speed, precision, and the element of surprise. However, there were alternative strategies being considered as well. Point 1 involved a carefully orchestrated bait and switch, where a smaller sum of money would be delivered to the pirates, while a separate team of security forces would attempt to board the tanker under the cover of darkness. Another strategy involved using electronic warfare techniques to disrupt the pirates' communications and navigation systems, rendering them unable to maneuver the tanker or coordinate their activities. Regardless of the specific approach chosen, the secret plan represented a bold and audacious attempt to outsmart the pirates and resolve the crisis without resorting to violence. It was a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the individuals involved, and a reflection of the international community's resolve to combat piracy and protect maritime security. The plan was a tightly held secret, its success dependent on surprise and precision, a dangerous game played in the shadows while the world watched and waited. The week that followed the hijacking was an agonizing period of tension, a drawn-out waiting game played on a vast and unforgiving stage. The supertanker, surrounded by a ring of warships, became the epicenter of a complex and volatile situation, where the slightest miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences. The standoff was a test of wills, a psychological battle fought on multiple fronts, with the lives of the crew hanging precariously in the balance. The ebb and flow of the negotiations mirrored the unpredictable nature of the crisis. There were moments of hope, when it seemed that a breakthrough was imminent, only to be followed by periods of stalemate and renewed threats from the pirates. The intermediaries shuttled back and forth between the ship owners and the pirates, conveying messages, clarifying demands, and attempting to bridge the vast gap that separated the two sides. One key moment of tension occurred when the pirates issued a new ultimatum, threatening to begin executing crew members if their demands were not met within 24 hours. The threat sent shockwaves through the negotiating team, forcing them to reassess their strategy and consider more drastic measures. The naval forces increased their presence around the tanker, signaling their readiness to intervene if necessary. Another moment of tension arose when a small fishing vessel attempted to approach the tanker, ignoring repeated warnings from the warships. The naval forces fired warning shots across the bow of the vessel, forcing it to turn back. The incident highlighted the challenges of maintaining security around the tanker and preventing unauthorized access. Despite the tense atmosphere, there were also moments of near breakthrough in the negotiations. At one point, the pirates appeared to be willing to lower their ransom demand, signaling a potential willingness to compromise. However, the negotiations stalled when the ship owners refused to meet their revised demands, arguing that they were still too high. Throughout the standoff, psychological warfare played a significant role. The naval forces used a variety of tactics to exert pressure on the pirates, including conducting simulated assault exercises, broadcasting messages in Somali, and flying surveillance aircraft overhead. The aim was to create a sense of unease and uncertainty among the pirates, and to undermine their confidence in their ability to hold the tanker. The pirates, for their part, also engaged in psychological warfare, issuing threats, spreading misinformation, and attempting to intimidate the crew. They released videos of the crew members, pleading for their lives, in an attempt to put pressure on the ship owners and governments to meet their demands. The crew members, caught in the middle of this psychological battle, endured unimaginable stress and anxiety. They were constantly aware of the risks they faced and the uncertainty of their fate. They clung to hope, drawing strength from each other and from their faith. The naval forces maintained a constant vigil around the tanker, monitoring the pirates' movements and preparing for any eventuality. They conducted regular reconnaissance flights, using advanced sensors to gather intelligence and track the pirates' activities. They also maintained a close watch on the crew members, looking for any signs of distress or attempts to communicate. After days of agonizing tension and relentless negotiation, the hijacking of the supertanker finally came to an end. The resolution, however, was not a clear-cut victory, but rather a complex compromise that reflected the difficult realities of dealing with Somali piracy. Ultimately, a ransom was paid, though the exact amount remains a subject of debate. While the pirates initially demanded $50 million, the final figure was significantly lower, reportedly in the range of $15 to $20 million. The payment was facilitated by a private security company, which airdropped the cash-filled containers onto the deck of the tanker under the cover of darkness. The decision to pay a ransom, even a reduced one, was met with criticism from some quarters. Many argued that it set a dangerous precedent, encouraging other pirates to engage in similar acts of piracy. However, the ship owners and insurers defended their decision, arguing that it was the only way to secure the safe release of the crew and the vessel. The safety of the crew was paramount, they asserted, and no price was too high to ensure their well-being. That a military intervention, though meticulously planned, was ultimately deemed too risky. The potential for casualties among the crew and the risk of environmental damage from a ruptured oil tanker were considered unacceptable. The naval forces remained on standby, ready to intervene if necessary, but they never received the order to launch an assault. Following the payment of the ransom, the pirates released the tanker and its crew. They disembarked in their speedboats, disappearing back into the anonymity of the Somali coastline. The crew members, exhausted but relieved, were transferred to a nearby warship for medical treatment and debriefing. The aftermath of the hijacking was a mix of relief and recrimination. The crew members were hailed as heroes, their resilience and courage celebrated around the world. They were reunited with their families, eager to put their ordeal behind them and return to a normal life. The ship owners and insurers faced scrutiny for their decision to pay a ransom, but they were also praised for their commitment to the safety of their crew. The incident highlighted the challenges of balancing ethical considerations with practical realities in the fight against piracy. The resolution of the hijacking had several implications for future anti-piracy efforts. That it demonstrated the limitations of a purely military approach, highlighting the importance of intelligence gathering, negotiation, and diplomacy. It also underscored the need for greater international cooperation to address the root causes of piracy, such as poverty, lawlessness, and lack of economic opportunity. The incident also led to increased security measures on board commercial vessels, including the deployment of armed security teams, the installation of razor wire and other physical barriers, and the implementation of stricter watchkeeping procedures. These measures, while costly, were seen as necessary to deter future pirate attacks. The hijacking of the supertanker served as a wake-up call to the international community, highlighting the vulnerability of global trade routes and the need for a more comprehensive and coordinated approach to combating piracy. It led to increased patrols by naval forces, the establishment of international anti-piracy task forces, and the implementation of stricter laws and regulations to prosecute pirates. The resolution of the crisis was not a perfect outcome, but it was a pragmatic one. It demonstrated that even in the face of extreme adversity, it is possible to find a way to resolve conflicts peacefully and protect human lives. It also underscored the importance of resilience, courage, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The supertanker incident prompted significant changes in maritime security protocols, leading to a more vigilant and coordinated effort to safeguard global shipping lanes from the threat of piracy. The lessons learned from this event continue to shape anti-piracy strategies to this day. The hijacking of the supertanker, with its unprecedented ransom demand and week-long standoff, left an indelible mark on the landscape of maritime security. The incident served as a catalyst for significant changes in how the shipping industry and the international community approached the threat of piracy, prompting a reassessment of existing strategies and the implementation of new and more effective measures. One of the most immediate consequences of the hijacking was a heightened awareness of the vulnerability of even the largest vessels to pirate attacks. Ship owners and operators began to invest heavily in enhanced security measures, recognizing that passive defenses were no longer sufficient. This included the deployment of armed security teams on board vessels transiting high-risk areas, the installation of razor wire and other physical barriers to deter boardings, and the implementation of stricter watchkeeping procedures to detect and respond to potential threats. The use of armed security teams, in particular, became increasingly widespread. Despite concerns about the potential for escalation and the legal complexities of operating with firearms in international waters, the presence of armed guards on board vessels proved to be a highly effective deterrent, as pirates were less likely to attack ships that were known to be defended. The hijacking also led to significant changes in maritime security protocols. Shipping companies began to implement more robust risk assessment procedures, identifying vulnerable vessels and routes, and taking appropriate measures to mitigate the risks. They also improved their communication and coordination with naval forces and maritime authorities, ensuring that they could respond quickly and effectively to any incidents. The international community also stepped up its efforts to combat piracy, increasing patrols by naval forces in high-risk areas and establishing international anti-piracy task forces to coordinate operations. These task forces brought together naval assets from multiple countries, allowing for a more comprehensive and coordinated approach to maritime security. The incident also prompted a renewed focus on addressing the root causes of piracy in Somalia. International organizations and governments launched programs to promote economic development, strengthen governance, and provide alternative livelihoods for young people who might otherwise be drawn to piracy. These efforts were aimed at creating a more stable and prosperous society in Somalia, reducing the incentives for piracy and providing opportunities for a better future. However, the long-term impact of the hijacking on pirate ransom demands is a complex issue. While the pirates' initial demand of $50 million was unprecedented, it did not necessarily lead to a sustained increase in ransom demands across the board. In fact, there is evidence to suggest that ransom amounts actually decreased in the years following the hijacking, as naval forces became more effective at disrupting pirate operations and ship owners became more resistant to paying exorbitant sums. It is important to note that the dynamics of piracy are constantly evolving, and pirate groups are always adapting their tactics and strategies to